Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for a little bit of fun kind of tech talk here on the golf side. Actually, one of our favorite topics of late. Talking about grip strength, grip pressure, and how it can affect the golf swing. Joined here with my good friend Dr. Tyler Standifird. So, Tyler, everything good?
Yeah, first day of class yesterday, so no complaints about grades yet. So it's makes for a good start to the week.
Always a good start to the season when the college students aren't complaining.
Yep.
Just a few things as we're getting going here. We do have a Q&A panel on this Zoom meeting. So if you have any questions while we're going over some of this initial information, please type it in that Q&A panel. Kyle Shea is going to be here as well. He'll answer some of those questions while we're going, and then other ones we will answer at the end. We're going to probably go through about 20 minutes or so of information, and then we're going to just open this up and see where it goes. So, Tyler, anything you want to add before we get rolling?
No, like you said, I think it's just been something we're excited about because we feel like we've been able to kind of put some data behind these topics that I think have been talked about for a long time, and just excited to share what we've been finding out.
Absolutely. Is that screen looking good to everybody?
Mhm.
All right, so I think we're there. Well, Tyler, I guess this is the big question, right? Like, we've talked about grip pressure as golf coaches for the better part of the last 200 years in a lot of different ways. Um, I think the general consensus that we would say out there, if I polled just, golf coaches across the world, I think most people are going to say we don't want grip pressure to be too strong, that it's going to inhibit the movement of our hands. Um, I mean, that's probably gonna be the first thing that we hear when we do those type of surveys. Maybe about a 5 or 6 out of 10. We've heard all of the old adages about hold it like it's a baby bird or the tube of toothpaste without squeezing it out. I think when we get started here, why don't we actually define what we're talking about when we talk about grip pressure? And then let's also maybe get into what we're talking about when we talk about grip strength.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Mike, that's kind of the key where when we're looking at these two things, as we look at the way that these have been talked about for all these years, it's important to distinguish between what strength is, which for us, and we'll go into this in a lot of detail, but it's mainly an idea of just how much static strength does someone have, right? How much can they squeeze? How much can they hold? What does that look like? Grip pressure is more of a representation, at least the way we've talked about it, I think, in golf instruction, has been more about what percentage of our max strength are we kind of holding on to, right? Is it a 7 out of 10? Is it an 8 out of 10? Where is that pressure located in the hand, lead versus trail? What's the balance between the two? And it's really important to understand both of these, Mike, because both of them feed into how golfers can utilize their hands in the golf swing.
Okay, so you know me, I like to keep things as simple as possible. It's always my goal. Interpreting the college professors, what I like to do here. So I think it's fair to say that grip strength is capacity.
Mhm.
So that's how strong are your hands. And grip pressure would be how hard do we push on the grip?
I think that works right. Can I add a caveat, Mike? I think would be the pressure is kind of how hard we're pressing or squeezing on the grip, maybe relative to our own strength capacity.
Okay, yeah, I like that. So, and again, I think it's a more complicated situation than just simply like how hard are we squeezing, mainly because, what part of our hands are we using to squeeze with? What part of the grip are we actually squeezing? And I think another big question that I want to answer today is when during the swing are we producing the most grip pressure? Is it the same throughout? Does it change from player to player? So we got a lot of cool questions here. Well, the first thing that I would say is let's make sure everybody knows just some background here on how we measure this stuff. The screen that's up right now is basically the dashboard for a piece of technology from Sensor Edge that's actually a driver that has pressure sensors built into the grip. You want to talk a little bit about, because we've been using that system to measure grip pressure a lot, right?
Yeah, and this is I think where we're able to talk about these things a little differently now just because of the advancements in the technology, right? Even as recently as, I don't know, 10 to 15 years ago, we were trying to wrap pressure map things that we use in feed around a grip to measure that. And now we actually have the capacity to have these sensors come in to actually look at exactly where the player is pushing, exactly how hard they are pushing. And if we create some nice static calibrations, that's when we can get into these percentage values. And so this is a great piece of technology that allows us to dynamically look at what's going on during the swing. And I think that's where we're able to understand more what's going on in the swing itself.
Okay, so this piece of technology measures a lot of things. It's going to measure the exact like heat map of where on the grip we're putting pressure. Now that can adjust a little bit when, depending on players that have an overlap grip or an interlock grip or a 10-finger grip, because it's only really telling where it is on the grip, not necessarily exactly where it is on the hands, but we can get a general sense of how much is happening from the lead hand, how much is happening from the trail. The thing I like the most is that it's going to give us a dynamic graph of exactly how much of that pressure is happening at different points in the swing. So we'll get into that a lot more here as we go through some of our players, grip pressure traces. And then let's also take a look at how we measure grip strength. And that one's a little bit more low tech, right?
Yeah, this is cool, right, Mike? I've got plenty of these in my lab. You can find these on Amazon. I mean, this is just a handheld dynamometer, which basically is you can see we give this to a player, we set it, and they squeeze this thing as hard as they possibly can. And this is how we're measuring that capacity that Mike described, right? A player might squeeze this and generate, 50 kilograms or 100, roughly 110 pounds. That would be the capacity of that hand to produce grip force.
Yeah, and I think that's another key thing we need to keep defining as we go through this. There's going to be different things to do to increase capacity, and there's going to be different things to do to maybe alter or change the way you pressure the grip during the swing, depending on what you're doing right now. I think it's also important to note that the measurements that we've taken have been on a fairly thin setting on a grip dynamometer. The one that we use that you see Cody Blick there holding can get a setting that's about the same diameter as a golf grip. It's probably still a little larger than a standard golf grip, but it's smaller. Or it's a pretty thin size so that we're measuring somewhat of how that player's hands work on the same size implement as a golf grip. And then obviously we also get measurements with the sensor edge technology as well, actually on the grip. Now, Tyler, next thing I want to look at is just, I kind of want to jump to the end, if you will, and look at kind of what we're seeing as the biggest trend here. And why don't you tell everybody a little bit about how this came about?
Yeah, this was a fun study. I got contacted by someone who was doing a kind of one of those, I don't know, community fundraiser type golf tournaments. There was going to be, eight players on every hole, and they wanted me to set up a little booth somewhere. And I said, well, give me a straightaway par four where everyone's going to be using driver, and allow me to measure their grip strength. And I took my TrackMan out there and basically measured every single person's grip strength and measured their club speed via TrackMan. Actually physically out on the golf course. So this was a population, again, it ended up being, I think, about 130 golfers or so who did the study, maybe a few less. A nice mix of men and women, nice mix of various handicaps, various club speeds, and to, again, take you back to just some basic relationships of kind of linear correlations, just plotted these two curves against each other. Grip strength in kilograms versus club head speed in miles per hour. And I think you can easily see that positive correlation, that trend of as grip strength goes up, club head speed goes up. And this isn't unique to us, Mike. I think this is something that we see in other people who are looking at this data, but it was pretty neat to have it in a population of over 100 golfers in just one afternoon.
Yeah, we'll talk some more about some of those trends. I just feel like there is a major correlation here especially with players that have deficiencies in grip strength, not being able to create club speed. The other side, it's not like guaranteed if you have a lot of grip strength, you're going to swing the club really fast, but it certainly gives you the option to be able to.
Yeah, for sure. And I understand, Mike, that grip strength tends to be related to overall strength, and I think that's true. But I think what you just described right there is really key, in that looking at people who have these deficits in grip strength, like you automatically know there are some things that they're going to struggle with in a golf swing. Whereas again, these players that generate just massive amounts of grip strength, it might not mean they swing fast, but they sure have a capacity if they do a few things right in the swing to generate high club speeds.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's switch gears here a little bit and let's talk a little bit about how we can possibly increase grip strength capacity. All right. And first let's look at some of the things that, we're seeing out on the PGA Tour or with professional athletes. Obviously, they're probably not Olympic power lifters, but a lot of these athletes are doing exercises that involve bars, dumbbells, kettlebells, anything where you're grabbing a bar and holding it that has weight to it. I mean, indirectly is going to have positive influence on grip strength. I remember back at our academy, one of our favorite warm-ups for our players was always farmers walks. And it's just something where you're holding heavy dumbbells or kettlebells down to your side and just walking and doing laps around the academy. And that over time is going to strengthen your hands. I mean, where's some of the other things that you see just in general exercise that can improve this?
Yeah, that's a big one. I like that one, Mike, which is, again, just picking up heavy things and lifting them. Again, something that I'm starting to see is like people using those straps if they don't want grip strength to be the rate limiting factor of the exercise, a heavy deadlift or something. And again, the issue there is now we're actually limiting kind of what we're doing with the grip strength. And so I think on the other end of that, Mike, is actually the idea of fat grip training. So this is one of my favorite things that I'm seeing in the gym, which is actually throwing these fat grips around the bars. And if any of you have ever done this or seen people doing it, the idea is it just really kind of creates this high level of activation in what you're doing with the grip strength muscles. I've actually incorporated this in my own training where I throw these in my farmer walks and do fat grip farmer walks. And again, it's wild the type of stimulus that you can start to get. And again, these are great things to do, Mike. I think these are wonderful ways to increase grip strength. It just does require, again, some of this type of stuff, or being at gym type settings, or frankly, even a golfer who is dedicating that amount of time to their strength and conditioning program, which I just don't think we often see in our amateur golfers.
Yeah, and again, there's other ways to train grip strength in the gym too. I mean, there's all kinds of different hand exercise devices. One of the big things that we're looking at here is you got to activate more muscles in your hands, wrists, and forearms that might not be functioning as well or activated prior to this. And that's really one of the things that these like fat grips in the gym will do. We had an interesting question I think we can just toss in right now, about talking about grip pressure. And, is grip size important to that? Well, I think it fits in really well right here. Like if I have somebody that has deficiencies in grip strength, getting like a larger grip is probably the first thing I'm going to try, because I can tell you this, if we just make that dynamometer bigger and give that person more room to grab onto, essentially, they're instantaneously going to be able to produce more grip strength. Do you see that too?
Yeah, I see that same thing. And I think that's an easy test to do to know if that is a problem, right? If I have a player that on the smallest setting, let's say they do 30 kilograms, which is, below what we would maybe like to see. And then I make it a little bit bigger and that jumps up to 45 kilograms. All of a sudden, I think I have a pretty good understanding that this player is going to really benefit from a larger grip, because when we make that bigger, they're able to produce more static grip strength. And so without a doubt, grip size and the fitting of these grips plays such a role and is nicely tied in with grip strength.
I think it actually may be like a chicken and the egg kind of situation here. I think one of the popularities that you've seen with mid-size and jumbo type grips that have been happening over the last few years, it's because there's been a little bit less stigma in trying them. And I think some people that might have a grip strength deficiency are finding that they can much more easily control the golf club using those slightly larger grips. I think it's a pretty interesting thing. I think it's a situation, though, where, if you're used to a standard size grip and you have a lot of grip strength capacity, there's no issue, right? It's all about, is there a deficiency? And then how do we attack the deficiency? One of those ways is to do what we're doing, talking about now, and that's increasing capacity, which is, again, some of these things in the gym. We'll talk about our super speed squeeze a lot more, but super speed squeeze is essentially a fat grip that fits on a golf club. So, we tried to make it really easy for people to improve grip strength capacity by using that training device. And we'll talk about, the protocols and how they work in a little bit. We also have a new protocol to show everybody today, which we're really excited about. So, Tyler, let's say we have somebody with grip strength deficiencies. What are some of the things that we see very typically in the golf swing? What happens?
Yeah, and we always like to talk, Mike, about this idea of there are some things that you aren't going to have maybe the capacity to do, right? Just having a lot of grip strength opens the doors, I think, for some things. And one of the biggest things is off-center contacts, right? So there's a lot of cool research about this. Funny enough, in tennis, I actually sent a study of this to Mike recently, which was this idea of like, they're literally shooting tennis balls at a tennis racket. And when you hit it right in the middle of the tennis racket, you don't really get some of these twisting effects of the tennis racket. Same thing happens in golf where really off-center hits, which we're going to see from time to time, the more ability to have to produce grip strength in that swing, the more you're going to be able to control some of that twist and get a little bit more stability in those off-center hits and find that you're not going to lose quite as much distance or lose accuracy with some of the twisting of the face. And that's a big one, Mike.
Yeah, this is another one of those, kind of backwards sort of things with grip strength and grip pressure. Like, tour players generally hit the ball much closer to the center of the face than amateurs. And, they have the ability to stabilize and control that club head at impact, whether it's hitting the ball first and then the turf, not hitting fat shots or hitting it right in the center in the sweet spot. They have a lot more grip strength generally than amateur golfers. Amateur golfers who have those deficiencies generally lose even more ball speed when they hit it a little off center, lose even more ball speed when they hit it a little bit fat or a little bit thin than a tour player would. So that, again, it's just almost like a catch-22 there for your amateur players.
Yep.
I see this guy all the time. I mean, how many people out there ever get that issue when you're, rolling through your golf gloves and you go through 10 golf gloves a month and things like that? I think one of the main reasons this happens, either at impact or in transition of the club, is going to be able to like really have enough pressure on the grip that the club doesn't twist in your hands. And that twisting motion toward the butt of the club there is really what wears that hole in your golf glove right there. So just another one that we see all the time, just being able to maintain control during transition. Mm-hmm. Obviously getting through the rough is another big one. I mean, we've had one of our LPGA Tour players, told us last year that, she has a hard time playing in like the Midwest and the Northeast. Like she gets in the rough, like she has a hard time hitting much more than a wedge out of there. And then we watch, tournament on the PGA Tour where they're hitting out a 4-inch rough and they take a 7-iron and nuke it 180 yards. Like, obviously it makes a big difference when you're talking about stabilizing the club head as you're going through a whole bunch of extra grass.
Yeah, and I think, Mike, this is a cool one, closer to home, maybe for some of you that are working with, maybe your senior golfers or your junior golfers. Most of my golf this last year was spent playing with my 72-year-old mother or my 11-year-old son. And my main message to both of them was just stay out of the rough. Those are populations that tend to lack grip strength. And it's like watching, my mom get in the rough. It was just such a long hole for her because she just had no capacity to do anything in that rough. And so huge deal for our players with low grip strength.
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of as a summary on the way I like to think of what does grip strength do for you in the golf swing, it just raises the speed limit. That's what I would say. Like if somebody has a massive grip strength deficiency, they are not going to be able to swing over a certain speed without having significant compensation in the swing. That could be early release or casting. That's a good way to take less pressure off of that connection. It could be excessively long backswings, like the transition of the swing not happening in kind of a short and powerful kind of position where we get good downswing loading. Like those longer swings, sometimes that's because they can't stabilize the club to make it change direction. We'll talk about that when we get into when in the swing do we use pressure, but that's a big one. Anything else you see there that I think is important to note here,
Again,
Tyler?
I think what you said there is the idea of the massive grip strength deficiencies, right? Something I'm starting to test on all the players that come through my lab. And again, when someone grabs this and all of a sudden I see very, very low numbers and a player who wants to swing the club faster, I instantaneously know that this is something that has to be remedied. Otherwise, we could spend all day long working on different techniques and things, but we're just kind of beating our head against a wall, Mike, right? Because
Yep.
their limiting factor is going to be grip strength. And so we've got to attack that first and then dive into maybe these other things that we want to do to help them build more speed.
Absolutely. Well, we got a good question here about, what are the ranges of grip strength that we'd like to see? Well, I just said we'd answer this one live because it's this information. So this information comes from about 10 years of our testing at our golf academy, and also a lot of the tour data comes from TPI. So this is on a lot of players. We've got a lot of stats here, up through long drive professionals, tour players, LPGA players, and amateurs. And, these are kind of the numbers that we're seeing. Um, you know, I I think that number, that like 60 kilogram mark for like elite level players, I like to see that, especially if I've got a player that's trying to push above 120-mile-an-hour club speed, which again, I would kind of consider that like elite bar that's kind of starting to come out. um again, look at that speed limit kind of range, right? Like we talk about 120 and about 60 kilograms. I think that's a fair, we're starting to see that as a pretty fair piece there. I think when we get down to amateurs, like when we see those grip strength numbers get down in the 40s, like if I'm seeing club speeds above 105 to 108 and I'm only around 40, I'm getting really concerned that there's going to be compensation. We start to look at like, amateur females, we start to get down in those like high 20s, like I'm generally always seeing some kind of compensation from grip strength there, like whether it's lack of downswing loading, casting early release, again, excessively long backswings that look like they just can't change direction. Are those kind of the similar type things you're seeing, Tyler?
Yeah, and I like when you talk about the idea of compensations because it's not saying that they're not going to maybe try and figure out a way to generate some of these speeds. It's just that they're going to maybe do it in ways that aren't going to promote some of the consistency that we want to see, in the swing. And if someone talks about ranges and deficiencies, again, my rule of thumb is, again, it's maybe a little bit dependent upon that player's speed. But if I see a female golfer come to me and she's below 35 kilograms, for sure below 30 kilograms. I mean, I am like, this is the very first thing we need to attack right away. If I've got an amateur golfer that's, probably below the, maybe 40 for sure, 45 even, and they want to generate some club head speed, I'm thinking we've got to get this number going up more into the 50s or higher for that amateur male, and for sure, 35 to higher for females.
I mean, I look at 30 and below as emergency procedures.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we've had tour players, that have come to us in that range, and it is unbelievable the type of results you'll see within a few weeks of it. Like, because a lot of people just don't do anything that even activates or even, breeze down the idea of working on grip strength. So,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, I mean, this stuff gets better fast. And you can see the trends too as you get up to your long drive professionals that are swinging the club at 150 miles an hour. Obviously, there's a lot more force going on there. They have to be able to stabilize the club more. It's not shocking that those players have ridiculous grip strength. Um, so why don't we take a look at a couple of these real quick? So, let's look at some of this sensor edge data and kind of look at that typical pattern of what does it look like during the swing and how much grip strength these players are producing. So this first one, Tyler's Cheyenne Knight. This is from last year in, I believe, early May. This is before we started working on some of this, and we saw some big improvement here. She ended up having a great season last year, but I'd like to think a little of that was grip strength. So why don't you go over this graph for everybody real
Yeah,
quick?
and there's some nice things that Cheyenne's doing here, things that we see in our better, more consistent ball strikers. And I think the first one I would point out is the variability in the red and green curves, meaning what we don't see is just that like grip pressure turns on and stays basically the same level throughout the swing. That's often something we see in our low level golfers, our high handicappers, our players who tend to struggle with consistent contact. It's like they just grip that club and don't alter the amount of pressure from lead to trail or combined pressures. And so you can see Shan does a very nice job of kind of building some pressure to initiate some takeaway. Then you can see those curves drop as she kind of goes further in the backswing. And then what we often see in the very best players is a peak as they're starting to change the direction of the club. That's a time where that golfer really needs to generate more pressure so they can alter that change of direction. And then we kind of see that tend to actually tail off a little bit as they come into impact. So that's kind of what those curves are showing, Mike. And we like to see that on Shan. We just maybe would like to see some shifts, maybe potentially upward in terms of raw
I mean,
numbers.
I think it makes a lot of sense, right? You need to pressure the grip more aggressively when you're making the club start moving or change direction.
Mm-hmm.
I just think about it
Exactly.
that way. Once it's already moving in a direction, you don't have to apply a lot more force to keep it going. You need to apply the most force and pressure when you need the club to change direction. So, if we walk through this, this is at address, right? And this is pretty typical of what we'd see with a lot of players. If you look at that, red line is her lead hand, the green line is her trail hand. We're seeing, so the 60-40, those big numbers are showing what percentage is on the lead, what percentage is on the trail. And this is very typical. Lead hand's going to be a little bit dominant there. And then below that, those percentages are her percentages of capacity. So at address, she's at about 62% of her strength capacity on her lead hand and 39 in the trail. Now, as that goes through the swing, you're going to see those things change. As we get up toward the top of the swing, we're jumping up a little bit. We're up to 81% on that lead. And transitions, this is kind of peak of where she goes. We're at 95% of her peak on her lead hand and 74% of peak on her trail. And that when I see that, when we're getting to almost 100%, I'm gonna guess that that's a player probably could use some more grip strength capacity because they're having to max it out pretty good in transition to get that club to change direction. Um, and then, as we get into impact, it goes down, which is pretty typical. She maintains a good bit on the lead hand here.
Yeah, and that's a cool one, Mike. I think as you look at those white percentage numbers, and that's kind of this thing we talk about in terms of what is the pressure, right? What is this scale out of 10? Am I a 5 out of 10, a 7 out of 10? And you can see here in Cheyenne during transition, she literally gets to almost a 9, 9.5 out of 10. And when you start seeing those numbers start to creep up towards the 100% capacity, I think that's a good sign that for that player's swing speed, it would be a good idea to raise the ceiling a little bit so that we can generate the same amount of force, but at a slightly reduced pressure.
Yeah, and I'd say this too. Everybody's a little different here. I think it depends on that type of golf swing. If you have a player, let's just jump in and look at Podrick here. But if you have a player who is creating an incredibly large amount of downswing loading, so players that create huge amounts of lag, they're probably going to need to create a little bit more grip pressure than a player that doesn't do that. And, Podrick is one that creates a lot of lag. So I've got him here, top of the backswing. Um, you know, Peak capacity here, we're pretty strong. And just so you guys know, Padre's one of those players that's above 60 kilograms. So he has all the capacity in the world and is still, producing a significant amount of grip pressure, especially during the transition of his golf swing. But I mean, to you, does that make sense based on the way he swings and how much lag he creates?
Yeah, for sure. This is one thing. It was fun to test Podrick and recognize that his power source was with that downswing loading and the lag. And so obviously his hands are going to play a big role in that. And I've seen this in amateur golfers as well, right? One of my buddies that I've tested who generates a lot of speed in the same way Podrick does, just a ton of downswing loading, really, I would say, mediocre ground reaction forces, his grip strength was above 64, 65 kilograms, big percentages. You know, those are the kind of things that like you just need a lot of capacity to be able to do that. And so it tends to sometimes just match the way they generate speed.
Well, I mean, in our assessments, we test grip strength statically to see if that's going to be a potential big power source for that player. You know, if I've got a player that has a little bit of a deficiency in grip strength and isn't creating a lot of lag, like it tells a coach kind of where you can go. I think it's a big thing to look at
Yeah,
too.
for sure.
Podrick does decrease a little bit down into impact, like most players. Again, I'd say he's probably one of the more aggressive pressurers of the golf grip that we've tested.
For sure.
And you can kind of see, I mean, he does create just a tremendous amount of downswing loading. So that's kind of a common thing that you would see with a player that does that. All right, well, let's talk about, some of these squeeze protocols. Like, the level 1 squeeze protocol that's available on the website right now is pretty simple. I mean, it really involves just a lot of activation drills of squeezing that on a golf club about as hard as you can, making some swings with it, doing some burst squeezes, doing everything we can to activate muscles and get the hands and forearms stronger. Again, there's a lot of other things you can do as well to work on grip strength. This one's just really easy. It doesn't take that long and it fits on your golf club. So I know we've seen some big results with players with this thing.
Hey, Mike, can you describe a little bit about what the squeeze actually is made out of, how it feels? I think there's some people probably have never seen it before.
Yeah, I should have one here. I don't have one right with me, but you can see Cheyenne holding it there. It's essentially made of a kind of firm silicone material. It slides on over your grip, so it's basically has a slit down the side, fits over the shaft, and then goes up on the grip. It's tapered inside, so it won't come. The club doesn't come flying out. And you use it by, again, holding it on top of the golf grip and squeezing it in various different positions. As we move into our second level of protocols, this is a brand new protocol that's going to be launched here probably within this next few months. This is going to be coming out with our SuperSpeed golf app. This one takes it a little bit to the next level. So we start to do some more of these positional holds in the golf swing. We start to do some drills that kind of tie in a little bit of wrist and kind of face control mechanics, especially with that squeeze it down drill and transition. We do some of these where we're really trying to work on that throughout transition and then also hitting shots with it. So we look at the level 2 here. I'd recommend about 8 to 10 weeks of that level 1 protocol, and you can do that protocol anywhere from 3 to 5 times a week is going to be fine. After you've done that for a period of time, this one's going to be able to start to really apply it even closer into some of the moves that you need in the golf swing. So we're really excited for that level 2 squeeze protocol as well.
And I would say, Mike, just if I can add in from the difference in the level 1 and level 2, as we've talked about it, we're not saying that the squeeze is the only way to improve capacity of grip strength, right? There are lots of options out there, and I could grab a thing and just squeeze it at my desk. I think the beauty of what I've started to see with the SuperSpeed squeeze in my data collections and in my interactions with golfers who are utilizing them is some of this stuff, which is the actual transfer to the golf swing itself, which I can't do that with really any other grip strength training device. This is one that I can throw on the golf club and start to feel those positions I want to be in when I need to generate pressure and when I need that to be a little bit more relaxed. And I think it just beautifully connects grip strength, the capacity to how you want to use it in the swing.
Yeah, I mean, this is all level 1 is mainly about it's just improved capacity. Level 2 is kind of applying that to the swing is a good way to say it. We had a question in there about hitting balls with the squeeze. We do hit shots with the squeeze on a golf club. That's, I think, one of the most cool things about the squeeze is that you can do that. I think that really takes that application side of that training to the next level. We had kind of debated back and forth doing that for a while. Tyler did some good testing on it and showed that there was no real downside there. Plus, when we did our initial filming with Podrig, I mean, he just put the thing on his 7-iron and walked up and, just smashed a 7-iron about 195 yards. So we're like, well, I guess you can hit balls with it. All right, Tyler, just a little bit about the initial study that you've done and some of the other stuff that you're working on now to test more of these improvements, and then we'll get to some questions.
Yeah, for sure. And this was kind of a fun initial start, which was we did want to make sure that this was a good training device to improve grip strength. We were pretty sure it was. We put it through a couple of individuals and ran some testing, and then this was one where we actually did a study where I was able to look at golfers. This was, I think, about 12 or so golfers over the course of 4 weeks. They just did this 3 times a week, 10 or so minutes a day, did the level 1 protocols, measured isometric grip strength via a dynamometer. And after those 4 weeks, saw increases of 5 to 6%, depending upon the hand. And so that was really exciting for us, because I have access to wonderful facilities here. We threw them on TrackMan as well, and actually saw some upticks of about 1.5 miles in their driver speed. This was actually a population that was a nice mix, Mike. I think there were 3 females in this study, 2 senior golfers, and then the rest were kind of your traditional, I guess, amateur golfer between the ages of maybe 30 and 55. And so this was a great study. And that kind of led us into then kind of looking at some of the things we're doing now, which is also looking at some of the sensor edge data, pre-post training with the squeeze, and looking at how some of those pressures change, looking at these things over time. And then also as we start utilizing this level 2 protocol, how does that then alter some of these things, as well as some of the kinematics of the golf swing, which will be fun to start diving into as well.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I'm going to get this screen share off here, and I think let's dive into some questions. Kyle, you got any that are at the top of your list?
Yeah, we've had a lot of questions about other devices people can use, like those hand crushers, what else they could do, just like a little training device, and then also other things outside in the gym. Tyler, I might throw that to you. I know we talked about some of the pinch grips and the thumb to fist grip. If you could review just a couple more of those for the people that are interested.
Yeah, this is where I would say, Kyle, that again, there are just so many good ways to train grip strength. And maybe that's not what Kyle and Mike want me to say right now, which is that there are a lot of things we can do. And we know this, right? We know this from a lot of research. Again, via, some of the things that we're doing with our kind of hands to create different grip things. And again, squishing balls and squishing things that way. And people talked about farmer walks being good ones. I think I saw a question about, hangs. And I like hangs. My only issue with hangs is that potentially we're now getting limiting factors from potential shoulder muscles and arm muscles, and we're not really isolating grip strength, which I think is our goal. And so that's where I tend to go more towards kind of a farmer's walk. I would still add that I think the beauty is, and this is something I see a lot in biomechanics, which is just because I increase the capacity of a muscle doesn't necessarily mean that that person's going to utilize it the correct way in a movement, be it running, walking, any kind of weightlifting. And so I love the combination of having this on your golf club, which then allows you to maximize capacity, but also then practice the techniques you need to translate it to a swing.
Perfect. Thanks, Tyler. We've also had several questions about why aren't most grips bigger on clubs? Would you recommend a larger grip as an older golfer, even more than a mid-size? Tyler, maybe you could also add about what Liam has seen with the correlation between finger length or hand length and grip size.
Yeah, it's been fun to connect with Liam Mucklow and Carson Howe up at the Golf Lab in Canada. They're doing some awesome work. In fact, they were the ones that first introduced us to this sensor edge technology, and we've been able to have some good conversations with them. And yeah, my favorite thing is that there literally is zero correlation to hand size and grip size. And in fact, what we probably see more often than not is that these individuals with really small hands, maybe our women, our junior golfers, they tend to have smaller hand sizes, lower grip strength, and they tend to do much better if we could get that grip a little bit larger. So I think that the answer to that question about why aren't more people using larger grips, I think it's partially we just didn't know as much. I think Liam in their most recent study said 80% of people are in the wrong grip size. And that's probably because at the end of most fittings, the question just kind of becomes, hey, what grip size do you want us to throw on the clubs? And you just say, I don't know, standard with 2 wraps, as opposed to actually testing it and seeing, hey, you could really benefit from a little bit of a larger grip. And I would say, like, I want to say that most individuals would benefit from having a little bit of a larger grip size, unless they just have through the roof grip strength.
Yeah, I mean, I can add some stuff on the golf side. I can say that pretty definitively at this point that hand size does not really determine what type of grip size you should have. I think testing your grip strength could probably give you a better idea. You know, if you test it with a kind of narrow setting and then a slightly wider setting, could definitely tell you if you're somebody that with a little bit more width there could use their hands better in the golf swing. Um, I haven't really seen any definitive studies at this point that prove, you know, that bigger grips cause you to not be able to close the faces easily. Like that was kind of the old consistent thought in the club fitting world that like a bigger grip's going to make me leave the face open and a smaller one's going to make me close it easier. I mean, we don't really see that when we test closure rates and things like that. So I mean, if the big idea there is why aren't grips slightly bigger, I would ask that same question. I think the trend that we're seeing is that a lot of players are moving to slightly larger grips, you know, whether that's mid-size or adding wraps or things like that, or things like Jumbo Max that are out there. And most of the time, there are very positive gains from doing so.
Thanks, both of you. A couple of questions about should we have a similar grip strength in both hands? Does it hurt if one hand is more dominant or extremely stronger than the other? And then also, question from Alexander about if you're, say, a Phil Mickelson style golfer, you're right-handed but actually swing the golf club left-handed. Is there any implication there on how that might affect this?
I would say, let me hit this first, and then you can add in, Tyler. I'd say the trend we see with every player we test is that the lead hand in the golf swing is more active on the golf club than the trail hand. So, whichever way you swing the golf club, it's certainly very important that your lead hand is strong. Now, that being said, I wouldn't really want to see a huge difference between the two. Like if I'm looking at an athlete and helping them max out their speed and power, I want both of their hands to be as strong as possible. Because, you know, again, I think my team makes fun of me for saying this, but there's just no downside to getting more grip strength capacity in your hands. Whether it's your lead hand or trail hand, there's no downside to it. It's not causing anything to go wrong in your swing. All it's going to do is help you control and stabilize the club better. So, yeah, I mean, more is better. That's my real detailed answer.
I would say those asymmetries or differences between the hands can really be a telling sign of maybe something else that's going on when they get really big, right? Like I know in the study that I did, I measured both of them, and I didn't have time to go through an injury history of that person, but I would hand it to them. Lead hand might be, I don't know, 35 kilograms, and then trail hand was 52 kilograms. And you're like, well, what happened? And they're like, oh, I've had like 3 surgeries on my lead hand shoulder and some elbow pain in the past. And all of a sudden, like, oh, wow, I didn't have time to assess that. But I think as coaches, that can be a really wonderful way for you to kind of dive into some of the things that might be going on to cause those deficits. And as Mike discussed, I always get really, really concerned when I see a lead hand that is significantly lower than the trail hand, just because we know how active it is dynamically during the swing, or should be.
Thanks, guys. Just to kind of top off this one topic, we've got some questions about grip texture. Should they be softer to feel those? And also, is there any implication on the lead hand strength with wearing a glove within the dynamic testing versus not? Any differences there?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, players going to do what they do, whether they have a glove on or not. Obviously, if the grips are really worn and slick, that player is probably going to have to apply more pressure to be able to stabilize that club than if the grip is really tacky and softer. Obviously, yeah, the more friction you can create between the grip and your hands, the easier it's going to be to control the club. So I guess theoretically, Tyler, you could have slightly less grip strength if the grip is softer, bigger, tackier than if it's smooth. But, you know, I think general rule of thumb there is get the grips that, are stabilized in your hands and then make your hands as strong as possible.
Yeah, you give me a chance to give an equation, and I will. So the equation for friction is the coefficient of friction multiplied by the reaction force, which is coming as a result or reaction of your squeeze. And so it's both of those things. And so as Mike described, as your hands or as your grip gets older and slippery, right, your coefficient of friction goes down. It's less sticky. So the only way to create more friction is with more squeeze. And if you don't have that capacity, you're going to run into a lot of issues. And so, again, old grips, needing to be replaced, I think is a big thing to look at. Gloves that wear out quickly, those are all things that play into this role because of that friction equation.
Perfect. A couple questions on swing weight. If grip pressure is related to swing weights, if you apply more pressure that way, and then what changes on swing weight if you get larger grips? I know Jumbo Max has some really light versions of huge grips out there now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the heavier the swing weight of your clubs, essentially the heavier the MOI of that club is going to be. So, it's like you're swinging a heavier club, the heavier the swing weight is. The heavier the club, the more stability you're going to need to create on the grip end in order to control the club head. So, yes, lighter weight clubs, I think, would be another way to fix, or another way to attack an issue where somebody has a massive deficiency in grip strength. That's the way I would look at it. Like if you have a lot of grip strength, you can probably handle a heavier swing weight, heavier golf club, with more control. If you don't, you're going to probably need to go lighter weight. Bigger grips generally are heavier. Now you're going to have to look at all the different companies because some of the companies have made larger volume grips that are not heavier than standard golf grips, but a lot of times adding that slightly larger grip can reduce the swing weight of your club. For some players, that may be a good thing. If you're a player that's really dialed into exactly what that swing weight has felt like for many years, you may want to alter that swing weight by adding some weight, either in a tip weight or something like that on the head, if you want that to match. But we have also found that adding some weight on the handle end, which is going to reduce the MOI of the club, can be a benefit for a lot of players too. So, that's one that I think you just have to test.
Yeah, and I'll just second that really quickly. One of my favorite things about being involved with SuperSpeed is the individuals I get to interact with in our environments and situations of collaboration. So one of those is Ian Frazier up in Canada, and really an excellent fitter, lots of cool data that he collects. And I would just reiterate what Mike says with, if you are a fitter or if it's something that you push your players to do, really understanding grip size and getting that dialed in and then kind of moving through or having that a part of your process so that you can tailor these swing weights for that player and really test it. It's just, I wish it was as simple as kind of one thing. I think Mike expressed some like good general rules, but just be willing to test it, right? Figure out that way to see, because I think we'd see a lot of players improve distance and consistency when they're fit in the right grip and a nice matching swing weight to that.
Sounds great. Would you guys be able to discuss any injuries with grip strength training, especially within the elbow? I think that's always a good question that people bring up.
I haven't seen anything with the squeeze. I mean, again, we're not doing like these are more isometric type holds and movements and bursts. Like, we're not adding a lot of resistance or weight to it. I mean, for sure, I think I've seen more issues with players that have existing either injuries or conditions with their hands and wrists and asking, more if they should try to do this training. Tyler, maybe you can hit some of that in a little
Yeah,
more
I'll just
detail.
say with the group I had, I think that last part is key. If you have this pain going in, for sure, any type of grip strength training is going to exacerbate that pain in the elbow region. So we do first need to get that under control. Once that's under control, isometric training, and this has come out in research a lot, where it used to be we kind of thought, tendons and ligaments, it were just really hard to train. They still are hard to train. They're not as responsive to training as muscle. But what we're starting to see is isometric type training can be a wonderful way to actually improve the capacity of tendons and ligaments and those things. So my theory would be if you have nothing going in and you do this training the right way, build into it as we described, which is probably starting out with maybe 3 or so sessions a week and then building up from there. I only see a benefit moving on as the capacity of those muscles increase and you're no longer working at 95% when you're coming through the rough.
I can tell you on the medical side, Tyler, I'd love to see a study of grip strength numbers through populations of golfers who do suffer from elbow tendonitis, golfers elbow, tennis elbow. I would be very, very shocked if players that have a lot of those issues, you know, I bet they also have some grip strength deficiencies and it's causing other things to overwork.
Yeah, it's a good hypothesis, I think.
So again, that hasn't been tested, but I don't know. That one just seems like one that we could prove pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
All right, a couple more really good questions here. For those that like to test their static capacity using a dynamometer, Steve brought up that we're using the Jammer one, which is a great one, a little more expensive side. If they wanted to do that on their own and didn't have access to that, is one of the cheaper digital spring ones sufficient? And if so, how would they set that up?
I mean, I'd say yes. I would say, some of the we like the one that Jamar one because you can get it at the same size as a golf grip. But if you can find one that has some settings that make it slightly thinner, and even if you can't, I mean, if you can test it at all, it's better than nothing. So I'd put that in that kind of good, better, best type of scenario.
Yeah, and I think if you're using the same device to track your improvements in your grip strength, it might not be that a $35 one is quite as accurate as a $400 one, but here's the idea. If the $30 one you test on that thin setting and your grip strength is 25 kilograms, it might be that you're somewhere between 22 and 30, but there's no way you're 50. And so I think that gives you an indication that it's time to get after it and train. And then you now have a good device that you could utilize repeatedly and watch those numbers go up. And so I think finding something like that could be a very great way to start and kind of move from there.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds great. Another question about chipping and pitching, how that pressure looks. Also training a lot with one-handed chipping and pitching. Tyler, I know we've got some great data that we just had. Plus, we had that great anecdote, Mike, I think I sent you from Scott Stallings about that. Wasn't really our intention to actually use it for chipping and pitching a lot, but we're getting a lot of feedback on that side.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, the old thought that like we're going to maintain exactly the same grip pressure throughout that entire motion it just doesn't really happen that way. Again, even in a short motion, when you're making the club change direction or move, you're going to apply more pressure than when you're not. If anything, we would see less grip pressure at impact with chipping and pitching than you would with full swing, just because you didn't need as much to make the club move in those directions. I think generally you're going to see a little less, but you're still going to see the same pattern.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think when we describe these individuals who are really great around the green, I would say that the common description I hear about them is they have great hands. And what I think about when they have great hands is it's a player who can apply the right amount of pressures and the right amount of raw values, but not be like at 95% of their max, right? Again, when we see in these really low level amateur golfers, even in chipping, they tend to push that up, into the 90-95% range. I saw some cool data that, again, Liam and Carson collect on this, that we've kind of seen similar things, which is the idea that, again, the closer you get to that 100%, there's just not really anything left over to kind of get that feel around the greens and do that chipping. So I think it can be a really wonderful part of improving your work around the greens too.
That's great. Just a couple more questions, Mike. Obviously, we've had a few inquiries about the app. Maybe just touch on that just briefly, just for those that are still with us.
I can say that all of us are all smiles and extremely excited about this app that's coming. So we're going to be debuting kind of an alpha version of it at the PGA show this year. there's a lot coming here. I mean, number one, we've got what, Tyler, 20 new protocols coming out.
Yeah.
So we've got supporting physical fitness, we've got ground reaction force, rotational sequencing, lag and wrist mechanics, ball speed application. I mean, there's a ton of new stuff coming with the app. So just stay tuned and be ready when that all gets here. The tracking and analysis side is unbelievable in there. We're really excited about all of that. And we're not just tracking like your speed club swings. I mean, we're going to be collecting driver club speed, ball speed. We're going to be tracking gains where it really matters. Really showing everyone how to create a very comprehensive speed and power program, the same way we would do with a lot of our tour players we work with. So yeah, stay tuned. Coming soon.
Thanks, Mike. A couple more questions here. A good one about taper versus no taper in the grip, how that might show dynamically, and if people should be looking more into possibly a no taper style grip.
I think it's some interesting stuff to test. I think probably the overall size of it is going to matter more than whether it tapers or not. Um, again, your lead hand is the one that's producing more pressure on the grip, and that's the one that's on the top part of the grip. I'm not, yeah, I think we'd have to do some more testing to see if that made that much difference.
Yeah, just don't have the data to answer that, Kyle. I will say that I do think part of the equation of this is also the feel of the golfer, right? If I put a golfer in a grip that they just are not comfortable with and they just cannot get comfortable with, that would obviously be a negative effect for that player. And so maybe some of this taper stuff would come down to that, where what Mike suggested is, again, I think a bigger grip would be definitely worthwhile trying. I think maybe taper, no taper, at least my initial hypothesis would be that that might be more of a subjective, how does that feel to the golfer, rather than maybe seeing something different on the data. But.
Yep.
Perfect. Quite interesting question from Alexander. Would just squeezing harder increase someone's club head speed when they're swinging with their current club or their grip?
So I'm going to say probably not, but that's with a few caveats here. So the first thing that I would say is that if it's a player who mentally has been told their whole life, I got to grip this thing at a 4 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10, or I got to grip this thing super, super light. And that's a goal that they have throughout the swing, is to make sure they're never gripping it very tight and they're gripping it super light. If that player doesn't have PGA Tour level grip strength, they're probably having some issues there that could be limiting their club speed throughout the swing. Now, that being said, if it's just X random person that doesn't have that predisposed, thought process of how they're supposed to be doing it, I don't think gripping it stronger is going to make a huge significant difference just by making that action. I think increasing their grip strength capacity, if they actually do train that and get stronger with their hands, has a very high likelihood of increasing their swing speed.
Perfect. So Tyler, I'll kick this one over to you. Why are we using kilograms versus pounds? And then just give quickly people the conversion right there if they want
to. Yeah, good question. I would say actually probably the main reason is that those who have been collecting data before us did it in kilograms. And so I think just to make some kind of cohesion there, it's kind of nice to make those comparisons quickly. Again, the conversion would be 2.2. So 2.2 pounds for every kilogram. And so if you want to think about it in pounds, again, kilograms will always be smaller than pounds. And so just multiply that number by 2.2 or divide your pounds by 2.2 to get into kilograms.
So you're thinking big numbers on the PGA Tour in pounds, 135, 140 pounds of grip strength.
For sure, yep.
And then last question here about an axe handle style. Any thoughts there?
I mean, I've seen some testing in baseball, where thinking about the fact that a golf grip is completely round and in the rules of golf has to be round, on most of those clubs, like it doesn't apply too much, but if you have edges where you can, especially if you're starting to try to create rotational torques in the grip, if you have edges that are going to create essentially more friction in your hand, I could see that being a possibility of something that could increase your ability to control the club with less grip strength. Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, friction and also maybe like the direction of some of these reaction forces, right? That would place it in locations and directions and point of applications that could really kind of enhance some of that. Again, I haven't tested that, but that would be kind of what I had theorized with that.
Yep.
Sounds great. Well, I think that hits us right on the hour mark and gets through all the questions. Really great webinar again, guys.
All right. Well, appreciate everybody spending some time with us this evening. Recording of this webinar will be available tomorrow. So, yeah, we got a lot of exciting stuff coming here at Super Speed Golf this next year. So make sure you're following us on all of our different platforms and stay tuned because, yeah, 2024 is going to be a big year here at Super Speed. Thank you, everybody, for staying. Tyler, good to see you. Have a great evening. And Kyle,
Yep,
thanks for
thank you.
moderating. We'll see everybody next time.
Yep. Thank you.